There is a stretch of road in eastern Pennsylvania where, on a cold morning, the ground breathes. Steam rises out of cracks in the soil. It curls up through the dead grass, drifts across an empty street, and disappears. There is no factory here, no machine, no one tending a fire. The smoke comes from below, from somewhere deep under the hill, where the rock itself has been burning without pause, without rest, for more than 60 years. This was a town once, real streets, real houses. A church on the rise, a post office, a gas station, schools, a population that filled the pews on Sunday and the bars on Saturday night. It had a name and a place on the map, and a zip code the United States Postal Service assigned to it like any other American address. Today, the streets are still there, the houses are gone. The zip code was taken back. The name was struck from official records, and on most maps printed after 1992, the town simply does not appear. It was not destroyed by a flood or a war or a bomb. It was condemned by its own government and quietly removed from the country it belonged to. The town is called Centralia, and the fire under it is still going. To understand how an American town came to be erased, you have to understand what it was built on, not what it was built for, what it was built on top of. Centralia sits in the anthracite coal region of northeastern Pennsylvania. Anthracite is the hardest, cleanest burning coal in the world. It is also rare. Almost all of the United States supply lies in a few narrow counties of this single state. In the second half of the 19th century, that geology was a fortune waiting underground, and men came to dig it out. The town was laid out in the 1860s by a mining engineer named Alexander Rea. He surveyed the streets, sold the lots, and named the place Centralia. Beneath those neat blocks ran the reason it existed at all, a dense lattice of coal veins and the mine tunnels that chased them, threading through the rock in every direction, layer below layer, going down hundreds of feet. For a while, the bet paid off. By 1890, nearly 3,000 people lived in Centralia. There were 7 churches, 5 hotels, 24 saloons, a theater, banks, a school. The mines ran day and night. Generations of families went down the same shafts their fathers had. The town was small, but it was alive, and it was anchored to something that felt permanent. The coal was not going to run out in anyone's lifetime, but anthracite mining declined through the 20th century. Cheaper fuels arrived. The big collieries closed one by one. By the early 1960s, the deep mines around Centralia had mostly shut down, and what was left underground was a maze of abandoned tunnels, empty, unlit, full of coal that no one was paying to remove anymore. Above ground, the town had shrunk to around 2,000 people, but it held on. People stayed because their families had always stayed. It was home. And then, in the spring of 1962, the town made a small, ordinary decision. The kind of decision 1,000 towns made every year. They decided to clean up the dump before Memorial Day. Centralia's landfill sat in an old strip mine pit on the edge of town. To reduce the trash before the holiday, the borough council arranged for the garbage to be burned down, a routine practice at the time. On the 27th of May, a fire was set in the pit. What no one accounted for, or what was ignored, was that the floor of that pit was not sealed. It opened through an unplugged gap directly into the abandoned mine tunnels below. And those tunnels were lined with exposed anthracite. The trash fire did not stay in the pit. It found the coal seam, and the coal seam led everywhere. Here's the thing about a coal seam fire. It is almost nothing like a fire on the surface. A burning building consumes itself in hours. A forest fire races across the land and then runs out of fuel. But a fire inside a coal seam burns slowly, deep underground, fed by veins of fuel that can run for miles, and a supply of oxygen drawn down through every crack in the rock above. It does not race. It creeps a few feet a year, sometimes faster, following the coal, and it is almost impossible to put out because you cannot reach it. The fire is sealed inside the earth, behind hundreds of feet of rock, in tunnels too hot and too poisoned to enter. The people of Centralia did not understand at first what had happened under their town. The authorities tried to deal with it the way you would deal with a manageable problem. In the first months they dug. They tried to excavate the burning material out of the ground before it could spread. But every time they opened a trench, they found the fire had already moved past it. They tried flushing the tunnels with water and fly ash to choke off the oxygen. The fire went around. They drilled boreholes to map how far it had reached, and the boreholes came back hot, the readings climbing past anything a person could survive. Over the following years, agency after agency studied the fire. The estimates of what it would cost to actually extinguish it kept climbing into the tens of millions, then the hundreds of millions of dollars. To dig out all the burning coal would mean excavating a pit hundreds of feet deep across much of the town. It would mean destroying Centralia in order to save it. Every plan that could have worked was too expensive. Every plan that was affordable did not work, so the fire kept burning, and the town kept living on top of it, year after year, as if a slow catastrophe could be outlasted by simply ignoring it. For a long time, it almost could. The fire was underground, the streets looked normal. Children went to school. Then, through the 1970s, the surface began to change. The first sign most people noticed was the snow. In winter, patches of ground in Centralia stayed bare and warm while everything around them was white. Steam seeped from the soil. Gardens died from the roots up. The earth in places was warm to the touch. In 1979, the owner of a gas station in town lowered a stick into one of his underground fuel tanks to check the level and pulled it out hot. He measured the temperature of the fuel in the tank. It read around 170 degrees Fahrenheit, close to 80 Celsius. The ground beneath his business was cooking his gasoline. Then came the morning that changed everything. On Valentine's Day, 1981, a 12-year-old boy named Todd Domboski was crossing a backyard in Centralia when the ground opened underneath him. A sinkhole 4 feet wide, then wider, swallowed him into the earth. He fell, grabbed at a tree root, and hung there, suspended over a pit that dropped away into darkness below his feet. The hole was venting hot steam and carbon monoxide, enough to kill. His cousin heard him screaming, reached down, and pulled him out by the arms. The boy survived. But the story did not stay in Centralia. A 12-year-old had nearly been swallowed alive by his own hometown, into a furnace no one could see. The sinkhole, when it was measured, went down roughly 150 feet. The ground people had walked on their entire lives was, it turned out, a thin crust over a slow fire. After that, the abstract problem became impossible to deny. The state began testing the air inside people's homes. Inspectors found dangerous levels of carbon monoxide, a colorless, odorless gas that simply fills a room and stops a heart. Families were given monitors to warn them if the air in their own living rooms turned lethal in the night. Some homes had to be evacuated on the spot. This was the moment the decision changed. For 20 years, the question had been, how do we put out the fire? Now the question became something colder. How do we get rid of the town? In 1983, the United States Congress allocated $42 million not to fight the fire, which was by now considered hopeless, but to relocate the people of Centralia. Residents were offered buyouts for their homes. The government would purchase the property, the family would leave, and the empty house would be demolished, its foundation filled in, the lot returned to grass. Most people took the money. They watched their neighbors' houses come down, one after another, until a street that had held 20 families held 2. The town did not die all at once. It was disassembled house by house with the residents' own signatures on the paperwork, but not everyone signed. A handful of families refused to leave. They had reasons that had nothing to do with carbon monoxide readings. They had been born in Centralia. Their parents and grandparents were buried in its cemeteries, which, oddly, sat on ground the fire had not reached, and remained there to this day, tended and intact, the dead more permanent than the living. To the holdouts, the buyout was not a rescue. It was a land grab dressed up as concern, a way to clear the town off valuable coal rights and call it safety. So they stayed, in a town that was being dismantled around them. In 1992, the government stopped asking. The Commonwealth of Pennsylvania invoked eminent domain, the legal power of the state to seize private property for public use, and condemned every building in Centralia. From that point on, the remaining residents did not own their homes. They were, in the eyes of the law, occupying state property. The condemnation made the erasure official. Centralia was no longer a place where people were permitted to live. 10 years later, in 2002, the final cut came. The United States Postal Service revoked Centralia's zip code 17927. It is a quiet, bureaucratic act, the cancellation of a 5-digit number. But a zip code is how a country tells its mail where you are. To revoke it is to say officially that there is no longer an address here. No one lives at this place. This place is not a destination. On the ledgers of the federal government, Centralia had ceased to be a town. The maps followed. Cartographers stopped marking it. New atlases left the spot blank, or labeled it as something else, or noted only an empty road. A town that had stood for over a century, that had sent its men into the mines and buried them in its hills, was lifted out of the official record of the United States, not by an enemy, but by the agencies meant to serve it. And through all of it, the fire kept burning. The clearest monument to what happened in Centralia is a road. A section of Route 61, the old highway that ran through town, buckled and cracked as the ground beneath it heated and shifted. The state rerouted the highway around the damage and abandoned the broken stretch. Over the years, it split into a long fracture down the middle, steam rising from the gap, the asphalt slowly heaving apart. Visitors began covering it, end to end, in spray paint, until the dead highway became a strip of color running through the silence, the most photographed grave of an American town. Walk the rest of Centralia today, and there is almost nothing left to see, which is exactly the point. The street grid survives: curbs, sidewalks, fire hydrants, the lines of pavement, but the houses they once served are gone. Front steps lead up to empty lots. Driveways end at grass. It does not look like a ruin. It looks like a town that was carefully, deliberately removed, leaving only its skeleton in the ground. By the 2010s, the population had fallen to single digits. A few residents, most of them elderly, who had simply outlasted the order to leave. Eventually, the state reached a settlement with the last holdouts. They could remain in their homes until they died. After that, the property would revert to the Commonwealth, and the houses would come down like all the others. The town was given an expiration date measured in human lifespans. The fire's expiration date is not measured that way. Geologists who have studied the scene estimate that there is enough anthracite beneath Centralia to feed the fire for another 250 years. The trash burned for a holiday in 1962 lit a fire that will outlive everyone alive today, and their children, and their children's children. It is, in every sense that matters, permanent. It is tempting to treat Centralia as a freak, a one-in-a-million accident, a trash fire that found a coal seam, the kind of thing that could never happen anywhere else. But the fire was not the strange part. Coal seam fires burn under dozens of sites around the world, some of them for centuries. The strange part is what the country did afterward. Faced with a problem it could not afford to solve, the government did not save the town and did not, in the end, even fight for it. It bought the town out, condemned what remained, took back its address, and let the maps forget it. The cheapest solution to an unsolvable disaster was to erase the evidence that there had ever been anything there to lose. The people of Centralia were not killed. They were relocated, compensated, processed. And that may be the quietest horror of it, that a town can vanish from a nation, not in a single catastrophe, but in a long sequence of reasonable decisions, each one cheaper than saving it. A landfill cleared before a holiday. A study that priced the rescue too high. A buyout. A condemnation. A revoked zip code. None of it looked like destruction while it was happening. It looked like paperwork. What is left is a grid of empty streets over a fire that will not go out, and a country that printed new maps without it. These are the places power forgot. The next one is a different kind of disappearance. A city, a government built on purpose for a future that never arrived. Refrain. Tagline aparece 1 times Nakoda. These are the places power forgot. One nuber pessoa, 0 u direto, sono hook generico de abertura. You have to understand. Aceitável como narrador onisciente. 3 hubere pessoa dominante. Hook, sensorial, steam-breathing ground, negação de norma, town with no people, misterio com payload, condemned plus erased, densidade visual, dividir aim 5 to 6 escena no sincronizador faz 2.5, 250 to 300 cenas alvo, gatilhos de motion plan, faz motion, timeline 1962 fire start 9:39, 172 rainy what mating 19 and stat 2.7 cc's 1 pop mitloich in 1990 someone at the Centralia gray reliquer over sant quart sinkhole sinkhole featuring croak quart sequence swinth there are no zeros really Tweefort. 4-7 sees 1 pop. 1-3 and